Yo, let's talk about Nahida's second act of her story quest, which I liked playing a lot. It was something I was looking forward to a lot, because like the other Archon's Act 2 story quests, they tend to deliver more characterization for the Archons and also some juicy lore details and reveals, which Nahida's absolutely did. So yeah, let's talk about Nahida's story quest Act 2, the Sapientia Oromasdis Chapter. The premise of the story quest is that Nahida is trying to investigate memories she can't remember, due to the whole Rukkhadevata eraser from Irminsul. She discovers a crystal that feels familiar yet unknown at the same time. The first thing that I notice is how she's just casually strolling around the city, which I think is a neat little character development from her first story quest, because there, she was struggling with trying to get more acquainted with the city and her people after she was freed. So it's nice that she feels more comfortable just walking around the city, and how her people are more comfortable with talking to her, like the interaction between her and the guard later on about the hydrofungi, which leads us into the main plot of the story quest. But a quick point before that, which is, I'm a little surprised that the Traveler was immediately willing to help Nahida remember one of her blurry memories, because, as was stated before, the Traveler has made a conscious decision to not tell anyone about Rukkhadevata. So it's a little strange that we're helping Nahida remember a memory, because, as we later find out, part of that memory is something that Rukkhadevata did. Anyways, this is just a neat little surprise for me, but oh well, moving on. A hydrofungi leads us to one of its family members that has pretty much fallen ill, and Nahida helps restore it after noticing that it strangely has elemental power flowing through it, which is unheard of. And this is where the lore starts kicking in, because this elemental fungi is able to talk, conveniently giving us lore bits about the early beginnings of Teyvat. You know there's gonna be lore when we're talking with a creature that even Nahida hasn't heard of before. Their race is ancient, having been in Teyvat longer than gods became a thing here, and they kind of look like slimes, so it's safe to say that they're one of the purest elemental life forms. Eventually, some apocalypse happened, which was forbidden knowledge, corrupting them and making many of them flee their homeland. And the main goal with the story quest is to help them return to their homeland, now that forbidden knowledge has been erased. Since they were away from their luscious homeland, most of them adapted to Sumeru's environment and chose to become fungi because fungi are the most well adapted to Sumeru's environment, which pretty much confirms that evolution is a thing in Teyvat. So that's cool, because science. Now, one important theme that gets echoed a lot throughout the quest is this idea of growth, and that growth requires time, which makes sense since learning and adaptation is something that's done over a long time. We learned in the Archon quests that Sumeru's withering is due to forbidden knowledge, and the elemental being tells us more about it, that its family members that have been affected by forbidden knowledge turn into tumors of the withering at the end of their lifespans. The being wants to bring as much of its family members back to their homeland, so it collects any residual energy from tumors that are destroyed. It's great seeing how much Nahida supports them here, even if she doesn't remember the promise, since it's a reflection of her kind nature as an Archon for not just her people, but all of Sumeru. To save the next fungi, Nahida learns to transform into a fungi as a disguise, and while it works, it does take a heavy toll on her to undergo a transformation in such a short amount of time. It's not even perfect either, because the other fungi will notice if they're too close to her. So this is another example of what happens when someone, even a god like Nahida, tries to achieve huge growth in such a short span of time. This was a good reminder to me about the Fatui's use of delusions, such as Child's foul legacy, since those examples tend to highlight that there's always a heavy price to pay for a big gain in power, or growth. That said, it's also surprising just how well Nahida's transformation was, so it makes me wonder how well she could transform into other beings like Geovishaps, Hilichurls, or heck, even other people. Anyways, after saving the animal fungus, we get told about where their home is, which is actually inside the Dendro dragon, Apep. Immediately, I was wondering if Apep would be one of the 7 sovreigns, because it's kind of implied to be amongst the earliest life forms in Teyvat, and the 7 sovreigns are said to be the 7 dragons that first ruled over Teyvat. Combine this with the fact that Apep is a dragon directly associated with one of the 7 elements. It's the Dendro dragon. I have to assume that Apep is one of the sovreigns. Apep being the most adaptable life form in the world would be fitting for a sovereign as well. Also, it later tells us that it fought against the Usurper, which I believe is the primordial one, so that also falls in line with the Sovreigns lore, where they fought against the primordial one. I think that in the future now, we'll definitely be getting more and more lore about dragons, since dragons were the first rulers of Teyvat. Apep was heavily corrupted by forbidden knowledge, and now because forbidden knowledge has been eradicated, Apep has a huge void in place of it, making it in danger of dying, similar to what's happened to these fungi beings that were also previously affected by forbidden knowledge. Apep's death would be disastrous for Sumeru because all of its held up elemental energy would disperse and wreak havoc for the land. So the memory that Nahida couldn't remember earlier until now is that she needs to help save Apep. Next, we head over to the Chasm because that's where some corrupted beings were able to find refuge. Apparently, there are still some traces of forbidden knowledge in the world because they were converted to oozing filth in the Chasm after coming in contact with the Divine Nail. This adds to the significance of the nails because not only are they able to help mitigate the effects of the immortality curse, but they're also able to negate forbidden knowledge in a way, which itself is abyssal energy. I wonder if there will be some importance drawn to the power of the sun in the future because the Lumenstone Adjuvant gadget, which is able to clear oozing filth, is described as having the power of the sun, which can be seen as an opposite to the darkness that is the abyss. I mentioned earlier that I was surprised the Traveler was willing to help Nahida with her memories, but at least it's established here that the Traveler doesn't want Nahida to deal with any forbidden knowledge, since it could trigger her. So at least there's that. When we save the Geoshroom, it recognizes Nahida as Rukkhadevata after Rukkhadevata had shrunk. So, Rukkhadevata was the one who made the promise to these beings to stop the apocalypse and bring them home. The crystal is called a Fire Seed, which can save the Dendro dragon. It was created by Rukkhadevata and the ancient race to mimic Apep's Heart of Oasis, the source of Apep's power. And unfortunately, the Geoshroom can't be saved anymore because it came into contact with the Divine Nail. So this also implies that while the nail can neutralize abyssal power like forbidden knowledge, it also prevents any involvements from gods like Nahida, so it's kind of like a double-edged sword. The Geoshroom mitigated the forbidden knowledge that affected it, but that prevented it from being healed by Nahida. So unfortunately it passes away, but at least its remaining energy is carried on by the hydrofungi. We follow the Fire Seed's resonance to where Apep is located in the desert of Hadramaveth. Something I wonder is why it's still in the desert area instead of the rainforest area. I know Nahida said earlier that it adapted to the desert area, but Sumeru still has some green area, so I'm curious why it decided to stay in the desert, especially since its Heart of Oasis is described as being lush and green. So it feels to me like it naturally wants to be with more greenery? But maybe it just decided to stay wherever it was at and then just adapt. Apep shows just how much its hate towards the gods go, because even though it's gravely ill from the corruption, it still refuses any kind of help or reasoning from Nahida. And even if it gets healed, then it'll just destroy Sumeru and the Seven Nations. This makes me really wonder more about the war between the dragons and the usurper, like the reasons for the war, if there could have been an understanding and then the entire aftermath of it. You know, this kind of lore could be a great plot for the Genshin anime, which I hope we get more news about soon. One more thing is that Apep brings up the truth, and the price that comes with it. So I also wonder if this truth is related to the information that Dottore told Nahida about the fake skies, and if knowing this information requires paying a heavy price. It could be the case that if one was able to analyze forbidden knowledge, then that kind of could tell you about what the truth of the world is? So this could likely be seen as foreshadowing for Nahida's character as she learns more about the truth of this world. But given Apep's warning, since Nahida's too kind of a soul for this world, we continue anyways, with our hydrofungi friend who's retrieved so much of its family energy that it grows suddenly into a bigger hydroshroom. The Fire Seed conveniently breaks, so that gives an opportunity for our cast to sacrifice themselves to make a new one. I think when Nahida attempts to sacrifice herself, at this point, it's pretty clear that she's just as good of a god as Rukkhadevata, since she's shown she's also willing to make the sacrifices for her nation. If she did end up sacrificing herself, she'd be smaller, just like with Rukkhadevata. But I do think that it's more thematic for the elemental beings to sacrifice themselves to help Apep. because their home is with Apep, so it's kind of natural for them to return home, hence the title of this quest, Homecoming. We defeat the new weekly boss, the manifestation of the corruption, and Apep is finally healed and at peace again. It admits that it was acting irrationally due to its hatred being amplified by the forbidden knowledge, so now it's able to reason better with Nahida. Nahida does all of us a favor and asks Apep to drop some lore as a reward for us helping it, and here's a summary. There is the Dragon King Nibelung that it followed, which I believe means that one of the 7 sovereigns was this Dragon King. I'm curious then which element Nibelung is part of. They ruled Teyvat, but an usurper from beyond the heavens, whom I assume to be the primordial one, waged war against the dragons. The victor shapes the world while the loser turns to ash, which is eerily similar to what Dainsleep says about Natlin in the Teyvat trailer. The dragons were at a disadvantage and tried using forbidden knowledge to help them, but the Dragon King was eventually killed. The Dragon King is said to have returned, so I'm curious how it came back from death. Apep tried to accumulate more forbidden knowledge and used King Deshret for it, but eventually got overwhelmed by the corruption. Eventually, some dragons accepted the humans, some died, and some fled Teyvat, maybe to the Dark Sea. Apep is very committed to the Dragon King and will follow its lead till the very end.
I would have followed you, my brother. My captain. My king.
That said, Apep will now watch over Sumeru to see how far the humans will go. So yeah, thank you Apep for telling us more lore. It needs to rest now for a while to become fully healthy again, but I definitely think we'll see it in action in the future, likely during the endgame of Genshin. And to close out this story quest, we revisit the fungi from the start and tell them about the fate of the elemental beings. Their family members won't be here anymore for the fungi, but hey, the forest remembers, right? So yeah, overall a good quest with nice character moments for Nahida and fun lore bits. I think the main things I took away from this quest are, growth requires time, but it can be bypassed by paying a price, and this applies to acquiring power, such as delusions from the Fatui. The conflicts between the gods and the dragons are not yet over, but it feels that there can be some kind of understanding that is reached between them, which is what Apep is starting to do by agreeing to watch over Nahida and the progress of humans. This is likely not the last we've seen of forbidden knowledge, and we'll likely see it again when we encounter more about the Abyss. Again, these Archon Act 2 story quests always have a way of making me appreciate the Archon more, and keeping me excited for more lore to come. So yeah, where's Venti's story quest Act 2? Anyone? Anyways, that'll do it for me. Feel free to subscribe for more content, and thank you for watching this video. Till next time, take care.